Doctor, he's unstable, I'm afraid. The voice of Madeline Carter came out far too sweet for that cold courthouse hallway, sweet like perfume in a waiting room. Her attorney, Evan Blake, opened a folder with surgical calm. We're requesting a protective order and an immediate psychiatric evaluation, for safety. On the other side, Daniel Carter couldn't even blink right. He gripped the strap of his own backpack like it was the last solid thing in the world. The judge, Meredith Sloan, raised her eyes over her glasses. Mrs. Carter, has Mr. Daniel ever threatened anyone? Madeline let out a rehearsed sigh. He has episodes, he changes, and then he says he doesn't remember. Daniel opened his mouth, but the sound jammed in his throat. That's a lie, he managed to say, low, hoarse. I never laid a finger on her. Madeline tilted her head as if that proved everything. See, Evan Blake added without raising his voice. He is agitated. Mrs. Carter fears for her own well-being and for the couple's assets. The word assets fell like a stone. Daniel felt the room spin by a millimeter. It wasn't about fear, it was about control. If you like stories where the truth shows up in the cruelest way, in the right place and at the exact time, subscribe, leave a like, and comment where you're watching from, because what Daniel was still going to hear in that divorce was worse than any accusation. The judge took a deep breath, without emotion, like someone who had seen it all. Mr. Carter, do you agree to keep your distance while this is investigated? Daniel looked at his own lawyer, Richard Hale, a man in a worn suit with watchful eyes. Richard whispered, "Stay calm. Any outburst becomes a weapon against you." Daniel nodded, but inside something burned, not anger, a kind of clean humiliation. "I agree," Daniel said, "because I have nothing to hide." Madeline pressed her lips together, satisfied, a smile that didn't show but existed. There, in that instant, Daniel understood the state he was in. He wasn't just a man in a divorce. He was a man being pushed, delicately, into becoming a label. Unstable, dangerous, untrustworthy. A man who, suddenly, had to prove he was sane. 2 years earlier, he had been the husband who made coffee and left a note on the fridge. He worked in internal auditing at a construction company, lived on numbers and silence. Madeline was the luminous presence, events, photos, laughter at the dinner table, the kind of couple friends pointed at as balanced. Until the night Daniel found on the tablet a forgotten conversation left open. It wasn't an obvious affair, it was worse. It was a plan. Messages between Madeline and someone saved as EB. He trusts too much. If he reacts, even better, we frame it. First, isolate, then destabilize. And in court, the narrative does the rest. Daniel read that with icy hands, sitting in the dark living room, and even so, he didn't make a scene. He closed the tablet, breathed, and pocketed the pain like someone pocketing a shard of glass, because a quiet certainty was born there, almost spiritual. When someone builds an entire lie, the truth doesn't need to shout, it just needs to appear at the right moment. The first sign of a turn came in a way no one noticed, a tiny detail, almost ridiculous. As Madeline left the courthouse, she forgot her unlocked phone on the wooden bench in the hallway. For 2 seconds, Daniel didn't touch it, didn't mess with it. He just saw, out of the corner of his eye, the notification jumping on the screen like a fish out of water. EB. Did he fall for it perfectly? Richard Hale, who was beside him, saw it too. And he saw Daniel's pupil dilate. "Don't look anymore," Richard whispered. "Don't give them ammunition." "But I saw it. I saw it." Madeline came back, grabbed the phone, and smiled, grateful, as if the whole world were her stage. "Sorry, I'm so nervous." Daniel felt something strange, as if he were inside his own body but without permission to use it, as if every human reaction, indignation, a shout, a gesture, were tied up from the outside. And then the worst part came. He started to hear everything. Not in a mystical sense, in the cruel sense of real life. Doors aren't that thick, hallways carry echoes, and people who think they've already won talk too much. In the elevator, Madeline laughed quietly with Evan Blake. "He's so predictable. He'll try to defend himself and he'll look even crazier. Evan replied, "We just need one episode. One. One call, one visit, one message that's off tone, and that's it." Madeline. "I can do it. I know the buttons." Daniel heard that standing still, staring at the elevator panel as if the numbers were a prayer. He wanted to bang on the door, go in and say, "I heard." But his hand didn't rise. His body stayed trapped in Richard's order. Stay calm. Madeline had spent years building his image. The intense husband, the man too sensitive, the difficult genius. Little stories tossed into friend circles. Little phrases. He gets stressed. He has some days. Now those crumbs became a feast in court. The following week, the cruelties with the face of care began. Madeline texted his mother, "Hi Patricia Carter," saying she was worried. She messaged his boss, implying Daniel was going through something. And somehow, the world answered exactly the way she wanted, with looks, with silence, with distance. Daniel tried to react once, just once. He replied to one of her messages, short, firm, "Stop it, I have proof." 2 minutes later, his phone rang. It was Richard Hale. "Daniel, she just filed that you threatened her by text. Do you understand? Any sentence of yours becomes evidence against you." Daniel stood still in the kitchen, watching the steam rise from the pot, feeling his heart pounding in his teeth. The claustrophobia wasn't a closed room. It was his entire life turning into a labyrinth where every exit looked like a trap. That night, he opened his laptop, hands trembling, and did the opposite of what instinct demanded. He didn't look for a fight. He looked for method. He saved screenshots, made backups, sorted dates, created a folder with a simple name: Truth. And, for the first time since it all began, he didn't feel weak. He felt cold, whole. Integrity, he realized, is a kind of weapon that makes no sound. Even so, there was a problem. Proof without context becomes noise. And noise was everything Madeline wanted him to make. Richard Hale scheduled a discreet meeting with a key person. Dr. Naomi Reyes, a forensic psychologist appointed by the court. "She's going to observe you," Richard warned. "It's not therapy, it's an evaluation, and your calm will be your shield." Daniel nodded. Inside, the question hurt. How does someone prove sanity when the other person has already decided your madness? On the day of the evaluation, the room was too white. The chair creaked. The pen felt heavy. Naomi Reyes spoke with human firmness. "Mr. Carter, I need to understand you. From you, not from the narrative." Daniel breathed slowly and answered, "I'm not going to try to convince anyone with emotion. I'm just going to tell the truth. And the truth holds up." Outside in the hallway, Madeline talked with Evan Blake like someone choosing wine at a restaurant. Daniel, sitting in there, heard muffled laughter coming through the door. He pressed his fingers into his palm. He wanted to stand. He wanted to scream. He wanted to break something to prove he was still real. But he stayed. And in that silence, which to many looks like weakness, Daniel began to build the only thing Madeline couldn't manufacture: consistency. Because justice isn't fast, it's slow and stubborn, and when someone tries to bury the truth, they usually dig deeper than they can handle. Do you want to know what happened when, in the middle of a hearing, Daniel finally showed the detail Madeline thought no one had seen, and her mask began to slip in front of the judge herself? The detail appeared in the most unlikely place. It wasn't in a dramatic screenshot or a leaked audio. It was in a rushed sentence, in a moment when Madeline believed she already had control. At the second hearing, the courtroom felt smaller than before. Dark wood, a flag behind the bench, the air conditioning chilling the back of everyone's neck. Judge Meredith Sloan came in, dry, objective. Daniel Carter sat beside Richard Hale. Without crossing his legs, without bouncing his knee, without giving the accusation a single centimeter of nervousness. Madeline Carter, on the other side, showed up in a light blazer, impeccable hair, and a folder far too thin for someone who claimed to be devastated. Beside her, Evan Blake, kept the smile of someone who knows the building's layout by heart. The judge flipped through the file. I received the petition regarding psychological evaluation. I also received the allegation of a threat by text. She raised her eyes. Mrs. Carter, describe what happened. Madeline took a deep breath, and her voice came loaded with innocence. He wrote me saying he had proof, and that I would pay. She squeezed the handkerchief without a single tear. I was afraid. Daniel didn't react, didn't blink fast, didn't move. He just looked at the judge with the face of someone who endures. Show me the message, the judge ordered. Evan Blake stood and handed over a printed copy. Richard Hale received one too, read it silently, and placed the sheet on the table. The judge read aloud, "Stop it, I have proof." She raised an eyebrow. Is that a threat? Madeline opened her hands as if it were obvious. It's intimidating. That was when the first physical, unmistakable sign happened, and it didn't come from Daniel, it came from her. Trying to reinforce the narrative, Madeline said one sentence too many, a sentence too small to be noticed by anyone who wasn't waiting for it. He's doing this because I found out what he did with the money from our trust, she blurted, fast, looking at Evan as if asking for rescue after the wrong word. The air changed. Richard Hale didn't move, but his eyes turned hard. Daniel felt as if a cold blade had cut through the room. Trust. That wasn't in the record. It hadn't been mentioned by anyone in any hearing, and most of all, that wasn't about fear. That was about planning. The judge noticed the slip too. Mrs. Carter, what trust? Madeline froze for half a second. The smile vanished and came back worse, crooked. I meant our finances, our assets. Richard Hale asked for the floor in the calmest voice in the world. Your Honor, just for the record, in no document filed with this court is there any mention of a trust. None. That word has just been introduced here, spontaneously, by Mrs. Carter. Evan Blake tried to cut in. Objection, that's irrelevant. Denied, the judge said, without raising her tone. I want to understand. Who instructed you to talk about a trust? Madeline let out a light, nervous laugh and pointed at Daniel as if he were the problem. He does these things. He manipulates words. He twists. Daniel took a deep breath, and for the first time he moved his hands. Not to point, not to argue, just to open the folder Richard had placed in front of him. The gesture was minimal, but it was a visible physical turn. His calm wasn't passivity, it was preparation. Richard leaned toward him, low. Now. Daniel lifted his eyes and spoke, without anger, without theatrics. His voice came out firm, clean, like a straight line. Your Honor, I heard Mrs. Carter and her attorney talking in the courthouse elevator at the first hearing. Madeline turned her face with a speed that betrayed everything. Daniel continued. They said they needed one episode, one message off tone, one visit, anything that looked like instability. I didn't react because I understood that every reaction would be used against me. A whisper ran through the room. The bailiff near the door straightened his posture. Madeline forced a laugh. That's paranoia. See? That's what I'm saying. Daniel didn't bite. He pulled a brown envelope from inside the folder and placed it on Richard's table. Richard Hale lifted the envelope as if it were ordinary, but the whole room felt its weight. Your Honor, Richard said, Mr. Carter didn't come here to accuse. He came to present facts. We have records of messages and a technical report of data extraction from the couple's shared device, prepared by a private forensic expert, Caleb Morris. And we have something else. Evan Blake stiffened. We will challenge it later, the judge cut in. I'm going to hear it. Richard opened the first sheet. The day before the first hearing, Mrs. Carter received messages from the contact EB, the initials of her attorney, messages with clear instructions. If he reacts, better. First, isolate, then, destabilize. Madeline sprang up on impulse. That's forged. Her tone rose and cracked the mask. Too loud, too fast. The judge looked at her coldly. Sit down, Mrs. Carter. Daniel spoke again, just one sentence, an awakening in the shape of a word. I'm not going to argue. I'm just going to let the truth speak. And that was when his silence became a blade. Madeline tried to retreat into the role of victim, but it was too late. I just wanted to protect myself. He's unpredictable. He has episodes. He scared me so many times. Daniel didn't strike back with a story. He didn't attack. He didn't call her a liar. He just slid, carefully, a flash drive closer to Richard. Richard lifted the flash drive. Here is the recording of a speakerphone call, recorded in the presence of a witness, Officer Sarah Whitman, an officer who accompanied Mr. Carter after he reported harassment and defamation. In this call, Mrs. Carter admits she needed him to look crazy. Madeline went pale in a way that was almost imperceptible. Evan Blake leaned into her, whispering something too fast, his lips nearly touching her ear. She swallowed hard, but her body had already given it away. Self-confidence turned into panic. The judge took a deep breath, like someone holding back her own irritation so it wouldn't become a spectacle. I'm going to recess this hearing for 15 minutes, she announced, and I'm going to request the presence of the district attorney's representative who is in the building. She stared at Madeline. If this recording is authentic, we are not discussing only divorce. We are discussing attempted procedural fraud, false reporting of a threat, and deliberate manipulation to affect this court's decisions. Madeline tried to smile, but the smile couldn't find a place on her face. Your Honor, this is a misunderstanding. Daniel rose slowly, not to impose himself, just to take the position of someone who would no longer be pushed. He looked at Madeline with a calm that hurt more than a shout. And he let it out, low, direct. You always thought I was going to explode. He paused. But I just listened. And I kept it. Madeline opened her mouth to answer, and nothing decent came out. Just a pile of broken justifications trying to hold on to her own lie. At the side door, a man in a simple suit came in with a folder and a badge. Prosecutor Thomas Keene. He spoke quickly with the judge. The mood in the room shifted from couples fight to procedure. For the first time, Evan Blake lost the posture of someone in control. He adjusted his tie, cleared his throat, tried, Your Honor, we need time to review this material. Thomas Keene cut him off without raising his voice. Time to review will come, but the risk here is immediate. If there was a deliberate attempt to influence this court with fabricated allegations, that calls for measures. The judge nodded once. Sharp. Mrs. Carter, the court will order the preservation of all your electronic devices, and until this is clarified, any allegation of Mr. Carter's instability will be treated with extreme caution. Madeline looked around as if searching for someone to save her. There was no one. Daniel felt his chest tighten, but it wasn't fear. It was the strange sensation of air returning after a long time trapped. But he knew that was only the beginning. Madeline's real fall wouldn't happen in a single blow. It would happen in the sequence, in the process, in the evidence being dissected, in the world seeing what she had really done. And that's exactly where the story accelerates. Want to know what happened when the prosecutor demanded Madeline's phone right there, and she made the desperate mistake that confirmed everything in front of the court? The request came like a sentence before the sentence. Prosecutor Thomas Keene adjusted the folder on the bench and spoke with the same calm of someone reading a train schedule, except the whole room understood the size of it. Your Honor, to prevent destruction of evidence, I request the immediate seizure of Mrs. Carter's cell phone and Mr. Evan Blake's, as well as the preservation of cloud data. For a second, no one breathed. Madeline Carter stood still. Her face remained composed, but her hands betrayed her. Her fingers squeezed the handkerchief too hard, as if crumpling her own story. Evan Blake tried to respond with technique, but urgency leaked into his voice. Prosecutor, this is precipitous. We can produce the device voluntarily, on a date. Judge Meredith Sloan cut in. No, here and now. She looked at the bailiff. Bailiff, please. The bailiff took a step. Not aggressive, formal, but it was the step that ends theater. Madeline looked at Daniel. The victim mask tried to return. Daniel, are you going to let this happen? And there was the irony. She still believed he worked by impulse, by guilt, by pity. Daniel didn't answer, not with anger, not with satisfaction. He just stayed silent, standing, his face firm, a silence that didn't apologize. Madeline pulled the phone from her purse slowly, like it was a gun pointed at her. The bailiff held out his hand, and then she made the mistake. Before handing it over, her thumb slid fast across the screen. A minimal movement, instinctive, like someone trying to erase their own trail. "Mrs. Carter," the judge said, her voice turning colder. "What did you just do?" Madeline froze with the device in her hand. "Nothing. I unlocked it." The bailiff, trained to see suspicious movements, stepped closer. "She touched the screen, Your Honor." Evan Blake tried to put himself in front, as if his body were an argument. "That's an interpretation. She's nervous." The prosecutor looked at the bailiff and then at the judge. "Your Honor, that gesture is exactly why the immediate seizure is necessary. If there's an attempt to delete data, that aggravates it." Madeline swallowed hard, and without realizing it, let slip the sentence that shouldn't exist. "I just wanted to remove something personal." Silence. The word remove hung in the air. Daniel felt his stomach drop, not from fear, but from certainty. It wasn't paranoia, it wasn't instability. It was a person trying to erase her own strategy in the last second. The judge made a short signal. "Take the device, now." The bailiff took the phone carefully and placed it into a sealed evidence envelope. Madeline was left with her empty hand suspended, like someone who lost the ground and doesn't know where to lean. Evan Blake took a deep breath, forcing control back into place. "Your Honor, with all due respect, this is drifting from the subject of the divorce." Thomas Keene replied, dry. "Procedural fraud isn't a drift. It's the center." The judge nodded. "I'm going to listen to the recording." Richard Hale was already prepared. He didn't smile. He didn't provoke. He simply connected the flash drive to the courtroom system with the court's authorization. The sound hissed, then stabilized. Madeline's voice filled the room. Not the sweet courtroom voice, but the real voice. Low, impatient. "How do you want me to do it? I need him to look out of his mind." Another voice, Evan Blake, answered, firm, instructing, "You don't have to invent much, just push. If he raises his voice, you cry. If he texts, you frame it as a threat. The court reacts to pattern, not detail." Madeline let out a short laugh on the recording. "He'll bite. He always bites." "Evan." "Then we tie it up. Evaluation, order, and done. The narrative closes." In the room, Madeline stood still, but her face was collapsing inside. Her expression was no longer a victim's. It was someone caught in the light. The audio ended. The silence that came after sounded like noise. The judge closed her eyes for a second, as if restraining her own indignation. When she opened them, her voice came out final. "Mrs. Carter, do you understand the gravity of this?" Madeline tried to raise the last defense. Emotion. "I was desperate," she said, and her voice faltered. Truly faltered, because now it was fear. I didn't feel safe. I said things in the heat." Daniel finally spoke. It wasn't long. It wasn't a speech. It was the revelation that closed the cycle. "You weren't in the heat," he said, firm. "You were in the plan." Madeline turned to him with eyes shining with mixed rage and panic. "You recorded me?" The attempt to flip the game came automatically. "That's illegal. That proves you're sick. You're obsessed." Richard Hale raised a hand, keeping his composure. "Your Honor, the recording was made to protect Mr. Carter in the face of threats of defamation and harassment. There was a witness present." The judge looked at the prosecutor. "Prosecutor Keene, I will request, in addition to preservation of the devices, a restraining order against Mrs. Carter with respect to Mr. Carter," he said, "and the opening of an investigation for false reporting and attempted manipulation of the court." Evan Blake went rigid. The color of his face shifted a shade. He tried to speak, but the judge cut him off first. "Mr. Blake," Meredith Sloan said, "you are an officer of the court. This recording cites direct instructions on how to induce behavior and manufacture perception. You will not argue now. You will answer in the appropriate proceeding." Madeline took a step back, as if the room had moved closer to her, and then came the moment she realized Daniel wasn't going to save her. That his silence wasn't cowardice. It was moral sentence. She tried the last card. Guilt. Daniel. We had a life, she whispered, looking like she remembered the past only to use it. You're going to destroy everything because of this? Daniel answered in the same tone he'd used from the start, without confrontation, without venom. You destroyed it. I just stopped holding it up. Madeline squeezed her eyes. The anger rose, and she exploded in the wrong way, the way that confirms the mask has fallen. You think you're a saint? She snapped, loud, letting her voice slip out of control. You think staying quiet makes you better? I did what I had to do. I was going to leave this marriage with something. I wasn't going back to nothing. The entire room heard it. On the bench, the judge kept her posture, but her gaze hardened. She wrote something down and said, without theatrics, record, clear change in behavior and implicit admission of financial motive. Madeline realized what she'd done too late. She tried to correct herself, but there were no words that could stitch that back together. Thomas Keene closed the folder. Your Honor, with that statement, I renew, risk of further attempts at obstruction. I request immediate measures. The judge nodded and dictated, firm. Full preservation of data is ordered. Mrs. Carter is prohibited from any approach or contact with Mr. Carter, and a formal communication will be open to the appropriate body regarding the conduct of attorney Evan Blake. And then the external intervention that changes the tone of a story happened. It wasn't, he said, she said, anymore. It was procedure. It was consequence. 2 building security officers entered when summoned by the bailiff. They didn't handcuff Madeline there, but the mere fact they came close to guide her said it all. Her era of control was over. She looked at Daniel one last time, trying to find a reaction in him, a tremor, an apology, a sign she could still pull the strings. She found nothing. Daniel left the courthouse with Richard Hale beside him. Outside, the sky was gray, and the wind hit his face like a physical reminder that he was still alive. But the battle didn't end there. The investigation would continue. The data would be analyzed. His reputation, stained for months, still had to be cleaned in the real world, not only in court. And that's where the story truly turns. Want to know what happened when the forensic analyst found, in Madeline's phone's automatic backup, the message she tried to delete, the most explicit proof that she planned everything to make Daniel look crazy, and how that brought Madeline down in a way she never imagined. The final blow didn't come with shouting. It came with a file. 3 weeks later, in a smaller room in the same building, white light, simple table, 2 hard chairs. Caleb Morris, the hired forensic analyst, set a laptop in front of a prosecutor, Thomas Keene, and Richard Hale. Daniel Carter sat a little behind them, hands together, posture straight. He looked thinner than at the beginning of it all, but there was something new in him. Stability that didn't need to be proven. Caleb spoke didactically, without inflating anything. I didn't have to hack anything. I just accessed what was already synced to the device's cloud, under order and authorization. The deletion attempt in court was useless. The backup had already done the work. He opened a data folder, some screenshots, some audios, metadata, dates, times. And then, finally, one specific message, marked as favorite in an old conversation, as if Madeline wanted to remember her own plan. Caleb read aloud, without emotion. When he melts down, you request the evaluation. If he stays quiet, you say it's dissimulation. Anything works. The important thing is the court believes he's unstable. The silence in the room wasn't empty. It was heavy. Richard Hale closed his eyes for a moment. That is the manual. Thomas Keene nodded. That is intent. That is premeditation. Daniel listened and felt a strange sting. It wasn't victory. It was grief. Grief for the life he thought he had, for the woman he thought he knew, for the peace he would never have in quite the same way. The second message was even more direct. Caleb opened it and pointed the screen so everyone could see the backup's digital signature and timestamp. I'm going to make him look crazy and keep the house. In the end, no one believes him. Daniel stared at the sentence, like staring at a cracked mirror. His lie had been planned with the same coldness as a contract. Thomas Keene stood, took the folder with the exhibits, and said, With this, I'm not only sustaining the investigation, I'm requesting measures for attempted procedural fraud, false accusation, and defamation. And I will request that the civil court reevaluate every measure taken based on her allegations. There was no going back. The truth no longer needed Daniel as a messenger. Now it had letterhead. The new hearing was scheduled for the following week. This time, the courthouse hallway felt different for Daniel, not because the walls had changed, but because the looks had changed. What had been silent distrust became cautious curiosity. People who avoided eye contact now watched with the face of someone who finally understood. In the courtroom, Judge Meredith Sloan entered with the same posture, but there was less patience on her face. Madeline Carter showed up late. Her blazer was wrinkled, her hair tied up any which way. She tried to put the mask back on, but the mask no longer fit. Beside her, Evan Blake wasn't there. Evan wasn't authorized to represent her at that moment, and that alone was a social sentence. In his place, a substitute counsel, Hannah Pierce, flipped through papers with the expression of someone who took a case far too late. The judge began bluntly. "Mrs. Carter, the court has received clear evidence of premeditation to induce a false perception of Mr. Carter's mental state." She held up a document, including a message that states, "Anything works. The important thing is the court believes it." Madeline tried to speak, but her voice came out trembling. I was under pressure." Thomas Keene intervened, firm. "Your Honor, beyond the messages, there was an attempt to delete data during a hearing and explicit instructions on how to provoke an episode. This isn't pressure. This is strategy." Daniel heard the prosecutor speak and by reflex felt the urge to explain himself, the habit of someone who'd been accused for too long. But he didn't. He stayed quiet. His silence now was a wall. The judge asked that the message be read into the record. The clerk read it. Each word was a nail in the coffin of Madeline's narrative. Madeline then tried her last maneuver, attacking Daniel's character. He's cold," she snapped, pointing in anger. "He always was cold. He always wanted to look perfect. He's doing this to destroy me." It was a mistake. The judge stared at her. "Mrs. Carter, Mr. Carter's emotional demeanor is not evidence of instability. Your premeditation is evidence of bad faith." Madeline choked. "But I was afraid." Thomas Keene opened another page. "Then explain why, in the same period you claim fear, you write that you will keep the house and that no one will believe him." Madeline looked at her own attorney, searching for an exit. Hannah Pierce tried to control the damage. "Your Honor, my client acknowledges that—" "No," Madeline cut in, desperate. "I don't acknowledge anything. This was taken out of context." Daniel, for the first time in that hearing, spoke, and his sentence was a short blade with no visible blood. "There is no context that turns a plan into fear." Madeline turned to him with pure hatred. "You're playing the saint. You want me to pay because you couldn't stand being left." Daniel didn't answer. He just breathed, holding her gaze without returning poison. It was integrity as a form of confrontation. The judge tapped her pen lightly on the table. "Enough." She dictated, one by one, the rulings in the tone of reality, without drama. The restraining measures against Daniel were revoked. The allegations of a threatening text were entered as inconsistent. The court ordered that any future communication would go through a formal channel, and it formally referred the case to the district attorney for applicable criminal action against Madeline and for review of Evan Blake's conduct. Madeline stood frozen, as if the judge's words were a wall coming down. When the hearing ended, she tried to approach him in the hallway, not with love, but with need. The kind of need of someone who realizes everything has slipped away. "Daniel, please, you know I'm not a monster," she said fast, almost whispering. I just wanted to survive." Daniel stopped, looked at her for a second. There was no pleasure on his face, no pity. "Surviving doesn't require destroying someone," he said, low. "That's a choice." Madeline swallowed hard. "I loved you." Daniel held the silence for a moment. Silence as sentence and as mourning, and answered only, "People who love don't write a manual for someone's downfall." He turned and walked away. The epilogue came without glitter. In the weeks that followed, Daniel had to rebuild his routine the way someone relearns how to walk after an accident. There were days he woke up with his chest tight, imagining someone would still call him unstable out of nowhere. There were meetings at work where he caught, in colleagues' eyes, the late guilt of those who doubted him. There were calls to his mother, Patricia, who cried, saying, "I should have believed you from the start." Richard Hale stayed by his side, guiding every step, reminding him that justice is a process, not a scene. Thomas Keene opened the proceeding. The official expert confirmed the backups. And, little by little, the story Madeline tried to write became the opposite, the formal record of someone who tried to manipulate and lost. Daniel didn't come out of that story stronger in the cliché way. He came out more sober, more whole. He learned that integrity isn't being perfect, it's not selling yourself when the world asks you to become a character, and the moral stayed clear as glass. When someone tries to turn you into a lie, your greatest act of power can be not shouting. It can be keeping evidence, holding silence, and letting the truth do the dirty work in the right place, in front of those who decide. And now, to close without breaking the mood. Comment which part of the video you liked most. Was it the courtroom moment, the manual message, or Daniel's silence that dismantled everything?